Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to talk about the new updated ITC Champions missions. In this video I will go over all of my thoughts on the changes and how I think they will change the way we play competitive 40k and whether or not I like these changes. I know a lot of my viewers are new to the competitive scene, so originally I was going to have an explanation of what the ITC is and everything ITC related, but I figured that's best left for a separate video. And instead in this video I'm just going to focus on these changes for people who currently play ITC games. So if you're new and want to learn about the ITC, like what the ITC is, how to join it, and many other things related to the ITC, my next video will be covering all of that stuff. So make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified when that video releases. But for now, let's get right into the actual content of this video, and let's go over the changes to the ITC missions and my thoughts about these changes. I am not going to go over every little change, because I assume you've already seen them all from either looking at the mission packet yourself, or you read an article about it, or you've seen it talked about in a video. But I will go over the stuff that I think is very important. So with that said, let's get started. So to start off, deployment has been changed for ITC. When players start a game, they roll off. Winner gets to pick to be either the attacker or the defender. Whoever is the defender gets to roll for the deployment map, and has one free reroll to reroll the map type if they don't like it. So no more alternating unit deployment missions. Every mission is now I deploy everything, then you deploy everything, or vice versa. Also, seizing the initiative is no longer a thing, meaning whoever deploys first will go first 100% of the time, and whoever deploys second will go second 100% of the time. I think this is a great change for the game. I honestly really enjoy this style of deployment over alternating unit deployment, since it can be very tactical and also saves a ton of time. And since we only have 3 hours to play a full game in a tournament, time is very important. So lowering the amount of time it takes to deploy is very good for having games played in full. Also, I think taking away the seize the initiative role is a great change as well, especially with the way deployment will now work for every mission. Let's give an example of why I think this way. Let's say seizing is still a thing with this new deployment type, and I win the roll off and I choose to be attacker. So I would deploy first and I would go first. So that means my opponent deploys second and will go second unless they seize. In this scenario, I have an 83% chance that I am going first, because all I gotta worry about is them seizing the initiative, which is only around a 16% chance. So it should be safe to bank on this chance of going first because the odds are in my favor. So I could deploy super balls to the walls aggressive, so that way I can get the most out of my first turn since I'll need the damage advantage. And I need that damage advantage because my opponent is going to have the scoring advantage because they're going second, and with the way ITC missions are balanced, the person going second gets the scoring advantage. If you don't understand what I mean about this, I'll talk about it in that next video that I mentioned earlier. So the person going first needs to get that damage turn 1 in order to get a damage advantage. But let's say my opponent isn't that skilled of a player and doesn't really know the odds or like playing to the odds. And now let's say they deploy their army right on the front line, matching my aggression. This is actually a very bad move because the chances are that they won't seize, and because they deployed so aggressively with only a 16% chance of seizing, then odds are that I'm gonna still get to go first, and they just allowed me to get way more damage off than I should have been able to had they done the smart thing and deployed defensively. So now let's say that player had a bunch of luck and they seized the initiative. So in this scenario, I've done everything correctly. I played the odds and deployed appropriately based on those odds, while my opponent did the opposite and deployed aggressively despite the odds, but he's rewarded for his bad play because of a 16% chance in playing against the odds. I don't think that's a tactical way to play at all. So now, without seizing being a thing, the person that deploys worst is going to be punished 100% of the time. Therefore, the more skilled player gets rewarded. So now, knowing that if you're deploying second, you're going to go second 100% of the time, the smart play is to deploy defensively as possible to mitigate the damage advantage that turn 1 gets, while retaining your own scoring advantage because you'll still have a ton of units in order to do so. So I think this change was good for the game, and I'm glad they chose to remove seize the initiative with this new style of deployment. Moving on to the next big change, secondaries have been changed. There are now 2 categories of secondaries to pick your 3 from. So we have seek and destroy secondaries and maneuvering secondaries. Basically, seek and destroy secondaries are stuff like headhunter, big game hunter, pretty much secondaries that just require you to kill stuff. And maneuvering secondaries are secondaries that involve standing in a certain area of the board. For example, recon, engineers, and stuff like that. But from this point on in the video, I will refer to these 2 categories of secondaries as kill secondaries and objective secondaries, since it's easier for me to remember those names and easier for me to write those down in my script. So with the way you pick your secondaries now, you have to pick 1 kill secondary and 1 objective secondary. And your third choice can either be old school, which is like a combination of both types, or 1 more kill secondary or 1 more objective secondary. So you can't take 3 kill secondaries and you can't take 3 objective secondaries. I think this is another great change. since you can't make an army that just wants to kill stuff and get away with it 100% of the time, like a Space Marine castle for example. And you can't make an army that just wants to ignore the enemy army and take up as much board space as possible and win by holding objectives. For example, a 500 Gretchen list. I don't necessarily believe this to be the case, but in theory, I think that's what they were going for. The reason I don't think it totally kills those armies is because you can still lean heavily towards one playstyle or the other with secondary choices. For example, a killy army can still take 2 kill secondaries and 1 objective secondary, and a movement or board control based list can still take 2 objective secondaries and 1 kill secondary. And to be honest, I don't think they needed to outright kill those types of playstyles because some people enjoy playing the game that way, and you don't really want to ruin those players' fun. But these changes will change those styles of army a tiny bit, and players who play those armies will have to adapt a bit for it. Because now the objective-based army is going to have to at least find a way to kill some stuff, and the kill army is going to have to find a way to do some objective stuff. So again, I don't think it kills either of those armies, which to be honest I think would have been a bad thing. I think it just changes it up a little bit so they can't just tunnel vision on playing in one very specific way. And now with that said, let's go over the new secondary objectives and the ones that have been changed and how I think they will affect the game. I'm only going to go over the new secondaries or secondaries that have changed to save some time. For the new kill secondaries, Born for Greatness. This is a pretty unique secondary where you nominate one of your characters and they have 6 different goals to accomplish, and each goal gives you 1 point for a maximum of 4 points like a normal ITC secondary. So these 6 goals are: destroy a non-character unit, destroy a character unit, deny a psychic power, hold an objective outside of your deployment, heroically intervene into combat, or begin and end a battle round wholly within your opponent's deployment. So I think this would be incredibly good in a Sister's army, since this is a perfect secondary for Saint Celestine. She can deny a power, she can easily kill a unit of something like scouts or even intercessors, she can kill some characters, she's fast so she can grab an objective outside your deployment or chill in the enemy deployment zone. She's also decently durable as well, so it's hard for some armies to kill her and keep her down. As for other characters, I also think this secondary would work well on Gilliman, the Incarn, the jet bike guy from Dark Angels, basically any fast, durable, killy character. I wouldn't take this on something like a Chaos Lord though, or another medium range character, since they do hit pretty hard but they aren't that durable, so most likely that character is going to die on the following turn. So I'm really seeing this only being good on the types of characters that I mentioned above, which are basically fast, hard-hitting, and durable characters. It could also be okay on stuff like Magnus or Mortarion, but since they are so big, it's hard to protect them because they can get shot at by pretty much everything on the board. Marked for Death. This secondary isn't new, but was changed to now pick 4 units that are worth 100 points or more as your target instead of power level 7+ units. I think this is a great change, because some units who didn't deserve to be marked for death targets, like strike squads from Grey Knights, were able to be picked as targets previously, and units like Invictor Warsuits who were power level 6 for some dumb reason were able to get under this secondary previously. But now with this change, it's the opposite. So I think this is a good change and will just make more sense on the units that you can select for it. Gangbusters. So this secondary has changed slightly. It's still 1 point for every 6 wounds you do to units that have multiple models with 3 or more wounds, but it now doesn't work on troops. So I think this means stuff like Tyrannid Warriors will be seen some more, and stuff like Cataphren Breachers, or whatever they're called from AdMech, they'll see some more play. Those units have always been good, but they weren't really seen on top tables because they just bled out secondaries. But now that's not necessarily the case, so I think we'll see those units a little bit more. The Reaper. So the Reaper used to be kill 20 infantry models for 1 point. Now it's for every 20 wounds you do to infantry models to gain 1 point. So this means a single unit of 10 intercessors gives up 1 point for the Reaper. This is a huge change and won't allow Primaris infantry spam lists to get around a lot of the secondaries now. Since if you see 30 intercessors and 5 centurions in your opponent's lists, you can pick the Reaper now and in theory potentially max it out. This secondary will still also work on stuff that it used to as well, like Tyrannid Gaunts, Gene Stealers or Guardsmen or Cultists, or really any of the Horde army stuff. But it's also a way to score off of elite armies now, and I think that's a good change. And now before we move on, Future Brady is here, because Frontline Gaming updated the secondaries today while I was editing this video, so I wanted to include another secondary, Big Game Hunter. This secondary is now 1 point for every 10 wounds you do to a monster or vehicle. This is another big change, since it means killing 3 Invictor Warsuits means you only need 1 more wound on another vehicle to max out Big Game Hunter. This also makes Venom spam less viable, since if you have 7 Venoms, that's 42 potential wounds in order to max out this secondary as well. And as a longtime Drukhari player, I admit Venoms were kinda bullshit and got past too many secondary options, which made them an incredibly good unit in the ITC format. But now with this change, Venoms can no longer avoid giving up secondary points. So this is literally now the opposite of the Reaper. So if someone wants to spam something like Sentinels, or Land Speeders, or any little vehicles that really couldn't be targeted by many secondaries like Marked for Death or Big Game Hunter, well now if they're spamming those things, you can still get Big Game Hunter from those units. So I think this was a good change as well. And now let's talk about the new and changed objective secondaries. Recon. So this is pretty much the same as before, but now if you have 2 units in each table quarter, you get 2 points for that turn instead of just 1. This means you won't be punished points-wise for sending out multiple units into different table quarters, whereas before, you kinda wanted to sit back and only throw 1 unit in each table quarter, since there was zero benefit to having more than 1 unit in each table quarter, at least when it came to scoring. But now with the option of getting 2 points a turn, you can try to max out Recon in 2 turns, and then have the freedom to move your army wherever you need it in order to do damage or get other secondaries. And now with that said, Future Brady is back again because in another update that Frontline Gaming released today, all of these secondaries I'm about to mention, where it says you can score 2 points in 1 turn for having multiple units that accomplish it, this only starts working on turn 2+. Because if you went first, your opponent wouldn't have any time to deny you area on the board to stop you from getting Recon and other secondaries like that. So now at least by delaying it a turn and saying you can only start scoring these secondaries on turn 2, kinda like how Engineers was, it gives your opponent time to actually be able to set up some defenses and roadblocks to stop you from being able to score those secondaries very easily. So I like that change as well, and keep that in mind that when I mention the rest of these objective secondaries going down, all of the ones that say you can score multiple points in 1 turn for having multiple units do it, all of them only start scoring on turn 2 now, so keep that in mind. Again, I'm adding this in after I already started editing and recording a while ago, and I don't want to have to do all that stuff over again, so yeah, just keep that in mind. All of these start from turn 2 on now. Behind enemy lines. Basically the same as before, but now you score at the end of your turn instead of the beginning of your next turn. So your unit doesn't need to survive a whole turn for you to gain 1 point. So definitely a buff, and I can see this being paired with Recon a ton in armies like Drukhari, who can fly across the board incredibly easy, or Harlequins or Tyranids. It's also buffed for melee rush armies as well, since your unit doesn't need to survive anymore. So you can send really cheap units into their deployment zone just to get those points before they die. And kind of like I mentioned earlier for Recon, you can also now get 2 points a turn for this. And the way you do this is by having 3 or more units in your enemy's deployment zone at the end of your turn. So I can see more melee rush armies taking this now as well, since before this change, it wasn't a great pickup for melee rush armies, because you'd send 3 or 4 units into their lines, and then you'd only score 1 point when it comes back to your turn, so you'd leave another 2 or 3 there, and then they would die, and you'd only get 1 more point, and then after about 3 or 4 turns, the war of attrition got to you, and unless you were dominating and just murdering the opponent, you're probably not maxing this out. So if you're in any sort of a losing position, you wouldn't have the units to be able to max this out. But now with the way this is scored, it rewards you for just shoving everything as fast as possible into your opponent's line, so you can max out those points. Even if you lose the war of attrition, you'll still win based off of points, in theory. So previously, this secondary was incredibly hard to max out when losing, but incredibly easy to max out if you were basically just going to table your army. So this is what I would like to call a win more secondary. But with the change now, I don't feel like it's a win more secondary anymore. It now feels like a more tactical secondary. Engineers. Same as before, but now you can score 2 points a turn if both of your engineer units are on different objectives. So really not much to say about this. It's still the same thing, only now you score more points. Sappers. Basically, this is engineers, but weird. You get to deactivate an objective and gain points for it. The objective stays inactive for your opponent to score on it while your sapper unit is within 3 inches of that objective. But if your sapper unit shoots or attacks, then they stop sapping and the objective is open again. So kind of like engineers, you will have to screen out your opponent from tagging your unit in combat and forcing your unit to attack their unit, which will mean you lose out on your scoring potential. But it can be done. The Postman. This secondary is brand new. You nominate a model in your army that isn't a monster or vehicle or Titanic, and they become your postman. Basically, you gain 1 point for each unique objective you move within 3 inches of. I think something like a shield bike captain from Custodes would be amazing for this. Or even Celestine, or any fast or durable character. This secondary also doesn't have any restrictions like not being able to fight or shoot, so you can still make use of your guns and melee capabilities while delivering your mail. I can see some lists bringing a unit specifically to make use of this secondary every game. Also, this secondary doesn't state that the unit or model you nominate can't be buffed in any way to not be shot at, so for example, Cloud of Flies or the Alpha Legion Strat Conceal. So you could make use of those types of things with this secondary as well. And that's it for all the new secondaries. So as a summary summary from these new secondaries and changes, I believe with these changes, armies in the game won't be able to win more games just because the units that they chose to use get past a bunch of secondaries. So I think these changes balance out the scoring aspects of ITC a lot better. Also, armies like Tyranids won't be punished because of the way secondaries work. Well, I mean, they still will, kind of, but now the opponent has to pick an objective secondary and only 2 kill secondaries, so it's not as bad. And also, to be fair, I think every army in the game is now going to bleed out secondaries, and not just stuff like Tyranids or Grey Knights. So I think that makes the game more balanced since every army has the potential to give away a lot of secondary points instead of just a couple of armies, with a lot of armies being able to avoid them. With that said, I feel like you can still game the system a little bit, but definitely not nearly as much as you could previously. So I think these changes were a step in the right direction. So essentially, I think that the armies that were the biggest culprits of being able to deny secondary choices, or at least good secondary choices, are now extremely limited compared to before. And I think armies that used to just bleed out secondaries like nobody's business are now not in as bad of a spot because, in theory, every army is going to bleed out secondaries. So overall, much more balanced for this iteration of the ITC. And now with that said, let's give my overall opinion. And that opinion would be that I really like all of these changes. And I think this was a step in the right direction for helping balance the ITC missions better. If there was anything I would have done differently, is instead of pick 1 kill secondary and 1 objective secondary and 1 of either, I would have made old school mandatory. So that way it further pushes the idea that you can't lean your army too much towards killing or maneuvering. And old school is literally divided half at that point, since 2 points from old school are from killing stuff and 2 points from old school are from maneuvering. So again, it literally would put it right down the middle. Half of your objectives are killing stuff and half of your objectives are maneuvering. But other than that, I think that this is the best iteration of the ITC missions we've ever had, at least in 8th edition. I never played ITC in previous editions. I've had a chance to play 2 games with these missions already, and it still feels like the same old ITC we love and are used to, but just better balanced. So for the people thinking that these missions were so different and going to change the tournament scene drastically, I politely disagree because I think it's more or less still the same as before, just better balanced. It's still the same old ITC where you kill more and hold more and essentially win the game off of that. Also, I think with these changes, the player with more skill will win more often than previously, which is also a good thing. I also think the balance between going first and second is a little bit better with these changes, but I still think going second has the overall advantage when it comes to winning games. I definitely like all the improvements they have to secondaries and dividing them up between objective and kill secondaries, and I can see a lot of lists taking those objective secondaries because they did get buffed. Now that you can get 2 points a turn for some of those secondaries, I can see them being picked a lot more. I also think with this new style of ITC and with the way that we pick secondaries now, people aren't going to be as afraid to put the units in their list that are going to allow their opponent to max out those secondaries. Because now if your opponent can only pick 2 kill secondaries, well then you might as well have 4 vehicles, you might as well have 80 wounds of infantry, and you might as well have 4 characters, because they can't pick all 3 of those, they can only pick 2. So I think that opens up build variation a little bit when it comes to people trying to game the system. I do think, however, there are still going to be people that try to game the system, but overall I do think it's going to be much better. And like I said earlier, I think some armies that were being held down by the ITC format, mainly Tyranids, are going to get a better showing. I don't automatically think they're going to become a top tier army or anything like that. I mean, they're going to lose less games that they would have before just because secondaries didn't favor the army at all. So again, overall, I love all of these changes and I'm looking forward to this year's ITC season. Anyways, I guess that's it for the review. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and whether you agree with the things I've said or if you disagree, and we can get a good conversation going down in the comments. I still read every comment, even though I don't have the time to respond to them all, but I promise I am reading everything that's commented on my videos, including the comments on my older videos as well. Also, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more Warhammer 40k content like this. Make sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter if you're into those sort of things, and also check me out on Patreon if you'd like to help support the channel monetarily so that I can continue making videos like this. Also, thanks to all my patrons for being awesome, and thanks to all of you viewers who enjoy watching my videos. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming.